George chased Leah in the sand. He could catch her quickly, but he pretended to be slower than he was, and she kept slipping away. They were college students, and George had a crush on her, or something like one. They came to the beach where he had come as a young boy with other friends. He had promised them the place was nice, secluded. The sea was clean, the scenery was beautiful, and there was a big city just half an hour's drive away for those who preferred to be in big crowds. Finally, George caught up with Leah, cuddled her, and lay her down on the sand gently. Their faces were almost touching. He looked deep in her brilliantly blue eyes. They looked at each other for a long time. Finally, she laughed and then said quietly, "Come on, silly, kiss me." And that's what George did. "Are you getting it on at the beach? Shameless rabbits," one of their friends called to them. They stood up and shook the sand off their clothes. "Cut the bullshit. Come on, let's start collecting firewood. It'll be dark soon," George said. Later, the 6 of them cooked their food over the fire and ate chops, sausages, onions, and whatnot. They talked, let the fire die out, then lay on the sand. Being so full, they drifted off, and the conversation faded away gradually. At one point, George got up and shook the sand off himself. "Where are you going?" Leah asked. "For a walk." She didn't say anything, just watched him leave the circle of light that the fire was throwing until the darkness absorbed him. George sauntered. It was very dark at first, but gradually his eyes became accustomed to the dim light the moon was casting on the shore. He wandered and thought of Leah. Did he love her? It seemed so, and it was serious. And now what? He had thought of it before, and he had felt afraid when he realized he was in love with her. It was a little funny to him. What was there to be scared of? As he thought about it, he reached the rocks. He climbed up and then descended to the bottom, to the secret place, and sat down on the sand. The waves washed the shore just next to his feet and hit the rocks on both sides and sprayed George from time to time. He looked straight ahead. He felt as if he was in the womb, protected now, but the world outside was waiting. The sea was dark and threatening, endless, or so he had thought of it when he looked at it from the same place when he was a kid. And now it seemed endless again. The opposite shore was infinitely far off, and the sea was bottomless. He recognized the Milky Way above. A cold chill crawled up his back. How small he was! An ant before a colossal sea in an even bigger universe. Alone in an endless world, without beginning or end, full of various strange, terrible things. He felt something touching him on the back. "Oh my God!" he shrieked. "It's me. Sorry," Leah said. "Did I scare you?" "Why are you following me? I want to be alone," he growled. "I want to be alone," she mocked him. Then she laughed. "But you scare easily for a loner." George decided not to be angry with her, but laughed with her instead. "Look up. How well you can see the stars from here," he marveled. The two stood next to each other, looking up. "Doesn't it make you feel tiny and alone, all that enormity?" George asked, and was surprised that he said it aloud. She hugged him from behind and said, "You are not alone, George. I am with you." He peered at her face in the dark. He couldn't make out her features, but he felt her. It was her, Leah. The feeling of fear and loneliness left him. He felt quite fearless and even wished he could show off for her somehow. He kissed her, then pulled his t-shirt off over his head and launched himself into the water. Hey, where are you going?" Leah asked, slightly startled. "In the sea, for a swim. The water is so warm," George said, and stepped farther into the water. "Oh, you're crazy," she said, but she was already taking off her shirt. Both were good swimmers. They swam farther out in the ocean where they could not touch the bottom. In the distance, The fire on the beach was visible, and above them were the stars. Below the dome of the Milky Way above, and among the waves that moved them up and down gently, they felt tiny, so small, but not alone, and they were not afraid. George descended the path to the beach. When he finally got to it, he was surprised. As always, the beach was deserted. So many years, and no one learned about this place, he thought. He did not delay, but went directly to the rocks. George climbed to the secret place and settled comfortably with the beach umbrella behind him to throw a shadow, and the fishing rod propped up in front of him. He pulled off his shirt and stood naked to his waist with his shorts below. His skin had acquired a dark tan. George had been at the seaside for a long time. Since Leah died, he didn't feel like staying at their house. His children and grandchildren did well enough without his help, and he delighted in the pleasure of going to the seaside alone for the first time in his life. He hung the bait on the hook, dropped it in the water, and sat on the sand. His thoughts moved slowly toward the past. He was reliving moments of his life, as he had been doing lately. Then, in the silence, he heard someone climbing up the rocks. A child's head appeared over the edge, and two brown eyes looked at George in amazement.
"I didn't know there was anyone here. Excuse me," the child said.
"Why are you apologizing?" George asked with a smile.
"Well," the
child answered uncertainly,
"I thought the beach was empty. Mom and Daddy found it and said there's no one here."
"Well, I wouldn't say exactly no one." The boy straightened.
"And I'm called Mike."
"Of course you are called Mike. Come on down here, Mike. That is, you can stay up there if you want, of course, but the sun is scorching." Mike climbed down and sat on the sand under the umbrella next to the older man. They were silent for a while. Mike was a little bit shy, and George was deep in thought. Mike drew a circle in the sand. George looked at it, smiled, and turned to the child. "Mind if I ask you a question? A kind of a riddle?"
"What riddle?"
Mike asked, interested. It felt good to be sitting on the sand between the rocks with the waves splashing right next to his feet, looking at the vast sea stretched out in front of him. It was a beautiful place to think, a lovely place for guessing riddles. "What do you think?" George asked. "Does the circle have a beginning